Hello, my name is Andrew Chapman, and today I'll be presenting a summary of the academic paper Tracking Ransomware End to End. Here, you can see some information about the many authors. Together, they represent institutions such as Princeton University, New York University, University of California in San Diego, Google, and Chain Analysis. Additionally, this paper was originally presented in the 2018 IEEE Symposium on Security and Privacy. As an overview, we will proceed with the presentation of this paper similar to how the flow of ideas is presented in the paper itself. We will discuss how the authors performed a 2-year measurement study of ransomware payments, victims, and their operators. While previous studies have taken the approach of estimating the revenue for a single ransomware operation or reverse engineered the technical inner workings of particular binaries, the authors of this paper are among the first to perform an end-to-end analysis of a large portion of ransomware ecosystem, including its revenue, affiliate schemes, and its infrastructure. We'll also discuss the addresses used by the cryptocurrency transactions to discern transaction attributes to ransomware campaigns. Thirdly, we will make mention of the ransomware clusters in order to observe the aggregation of cryptocurrency associated with several victims to identifiable locations known to be associated with malware families or syndicates. Fourthly, we will discuss the author's estimation of revenue collected from victims, as well as the payment mechanisms likely to be purchased from exchanges before paying a ransom. Lastly, we will discuss the community impact of discussing analysis done by the authors, such as how many victims are commonly affected and how long it takes for the encryption of personal files to take. The background of the paper is organized such that we can learn about the methods used to track cryptocurrency-based financial transactions, including the ransomware payments, the victims, as well as the attackers. In its beginnings, ransoms were demanded via a collection of online cash-equivalent payment instruments, such as MoneyPack, PaySafeCard, or Ucash. From the ransomware operator's perspective, these instruments have undesirable properties, mainly that they're limited in their geographic availability and are run by companies that are subject to the local law. However, to overcome these drawbacks, the operators of many major ransomware families have adopted Bitcoin. This cryptocurrency poses a challenge to law enforcement as it is a decentralized, largely unregulated, and all parties in a transaction are hidden behind pseudo-anonymous identities. However, Bitcoin also has the property of being undesirable to cybercriminals, since all transactions are public by design. This enables researchers through transaction clustering and tracing to glean at the financial inner workings of entire cybercriminal operations. We also discuss possible intervention points, open challenges in a ransomware measurement, and unique ethical issues specific to ransomware research. Being as it is that Bitcoin blockchain is a public sequence of timestamped transactions that involve wallet addresses, we can discern transactions related to ransomware campaigns via the author's methodology of using these addresses to trace known victim payments. The payment tracking pipeline begins with methods to discover seed addresses, or real addresses, associated with a small number of known ransomware victims. To find the real addresses of victims, the authors automatically scrape reports of ransomware infection in public online forums and extract the seed ransom addresses via text or image analysis. A second option, since infection reports from real paying victims are often hard to come by and especially rare, the authors extend coverage through the use of synthetic addresses, which are essentially artificially created by triggering ransomware malware in a controlled environment within a virtual machine. From the point of knowing the addresses used to submit ransomware payments, the addresses are input into a cluster, presumably under the control of the same ransomware attack cell or family. If they were used in the same transaction, or in the case of synthetic addresses, they're specifically moved to the cluster owned by an attacker. These clusters and their composite addresses can identify the attackers to which ransomware payments are being made. Tracking addresses into clusters uses two approaches: co-spending and micropayments. With the co-spending approach, we essentially identify the real addresses submitted toward the same transaction, and from there, track these addresses to the cluster owned by the attacker. In the case of synthetic addresses, the approach is slightly different. We must use micropayments to trigger the transfer of the addresses associated with the payment so that we may then identify the attacker's cluster. Based on the inflows to a certain attacker's cluster, we can often determine which exchange the bitcoins used for paying the ransom came from. Commonly, the majority of inflows of ransomware dollars originate from Bithumb, Coin.mx, Coinbase, Corbit, and local bitcoins exchanges. Once the bitcoins are acquired, the logical next step is to send them to a ransom address to create a transaction to satisfy the attacker's demands. With this common activity, we can estimate the number of paying victims to a certain Bitcoin family or exchange, and even deduce the dollar amounts of the ransoms compared to those of others. Once the victim has submitted the ransom, we can even extract the timestamp in terms of the days of the week and hours of the day. Interestingly, some Bitcoin families or attackers experience a higher influx of ransom payments within a single peak hour. This is likely explained by the victims being concentrated within a certain geographic region, although the authors have not explicitly validated this idea. Once all infections to an attacker's cluster have reached a level they consider to be meaningful enough to convert to fiat currency, processes related to Bitcoin outflows can soon be observed. Since, according to the authors, it is not feasible to determine exactly when conversion of Bitcoins to fiat currency takes place, we are still able to determine the period of which attack operators hold their Bitcoins before potentially cashing out. By definition, these outflows of Bitcoins most often are transferred to a non-ransomware cluster, which, using the Chain Analysis API, the authors can obtain the real-world identities of these clusters. From this point, if law enforcement were able to obtain the internal transaction records of one of these destination clusters, they could potentially trace the outflow values and then determine the source. Several operators of Bitcoin exchanges, such as BTCE, dealing in ransomware, have been arrested via this one technique alone. In order to understand the impact of ransomware on its victims, the authors take the approach of intercepting the telemetry traffic from one or more of the commonly known ransomware families. We can use this data to determine how many victims are infected by a single attack, as well as how long it takes for the encryption process to complete. To obtain this needed data, we must first reverse engineer how the malware controlling the ransomware communicates with the ransomware operators. For this exercise, the authors chose not to use a virtual environment to reduce the likelihood that the ransomware samples might behave differently from those found in the wild. First, the authors capture all packets sent by the machine using TCP dump and place documents known to become encrypted once the attack has occurred on the file system. The authors also log any changes made to the file system so that we can track the malware's progress. In each of the three executions of the same binary, it consistently broadcasts the UDP packets to 4 different subnets at port 6892. For each of these subnets, the binary sends 3 types of packets. Before the binary encrypts any files, it sends out the first type of UDP packets, which we shall call packets A. Each of these packets include a 5-byte identifier in the payload, which is referred to as the partner ID by an analysis report. This ID is the constant when re-executing the same binary, but it changes with a different binary. Within 5 seconds of broadcasting packets A to 4 subnets, the binary starts encrypting the author's files, followed by the broadcast of the second type of packets, which the authors call packets B. The payload of these packets includes the partner ID and a 12-byte identifier that changes across execution of the same binary, which the report refers to as the machine ID. Within 5 seconds of the termination of encryption, the binary broadcasts the third type of packets, which the authors call packet C, whose payload includes the machine ID. Afterwards, the ransom note is displayed on the victim's desktop, from which the authors extract the ransom wallet address. Finally, the authors re-image the host's hard disk to prepare for the next execution. It is widely known that ransomware causes harm to many people either through monetary losses or destruction of their personal files. This threat is challenging to measure, but an improved understanding of the ransomware ecosystem is a key first step towards identifying new and potentially more effective intervention strategies. Based on the author's measurements, they propose a strategy to measure and reduce the harm caused by malware against victims. One open question left unanswered by this paper is the topic of conversion, or the percentage of people that actually pay the ransom in order to have their data restored to them. Specifically, the data from the study offers telemetry data to provide indirect access to individual victims' payment records. After the ransomware finishes the encryption, the ransom note automatically appears on the victim's desktop and asks the victim to visit a set of ransom payment websites. To pay, the victim visits one of the URLs and sees a web page customized for them. The web page contains a Bitcoin ransom address unique to the victim and the ransom amount. A 5-day countdown is then started when a victim visits the page for the first time. Afterwards, the ransom doubles. However, the authors did not conduct this particular analysis, since visiting the URL might cause undue harm to victims. If the authors visit the URL before the victim visits, the countdown could start immediately, which might cause the victim to have to pay double the ransom amount. Regardless of how long the authors waited in order to try to analyze this particular aspect of the malware, there could always be a chance that the victims either visited the payment URLs or decided to reinstall their systems during this period. As such, the risks of the analysis outweigh the benefit of estimating the conversion rate. Secondly, in terms of intervention, one possible option is to disrupt the victim's ability to pay the ransom in the first place. This could be accomplished by the authors using their own wallet addresses to send bitcoins to the wallet address controlled by the malware family, which in turn would create new host names to divert visits from the victims away from the intended payment location. This stems from the idea that the URLs the victims are intended to visit are created using a domain generation algorithm. So this would be another unethical approach that the authors could have taken, and most likely would have prevented victims from recovering their files as well. In terms of related work, the initial Bitcoin tracing method that links together flows with multiple input transactions was proposed in prior studies, as well as in the original paper proposing Bitcoin itself. However, this method is now prone to incorrectly linking flows that use anonymization techniques, such as CoinJoin and CoinSwap. Many other authors have developed methods of detecting likely anonymized transactions. In fact, the authors use Chain Analysis Platform, which uses all these methods and additional proprietary techniques to detect and remove anonymized transactions to trace flows of Bitcoins. BitIodine is a Bitcoin forensic analysis tool which used reported victim ransom payments to perform a payment analysis for a single ransomware family, CryptoLocker. A follow-up study by another academic performed an expanded analysis of CryptoLocker by discovering additional reported victim ransom payments and further analyzing whether an inflow is a likely victim payment. Finally, researchers from FireEye performed an analysis of the actual conversion rate of infections to paying victims for Tesla Crypt. The data source for the FireEye study was not explicitly mentioned, but was likely the back-end database for Tesla Crypt that was either leaked or seized by authority figures. Intervention strategies, including technical solutions such as detecting changes on the file system as a result of ransomware infection, and analyzing network traffic, or for that matter, economic solutions such as disrupting the payment processors. The authors use BinDiff to identify similar malware binaries, and other related methods include Sigmal. In conclusion, the author's study of the ransomware ecosystem illustrates that the phenomenon of cybercriminals increasingly using Bitcoin for the payments produces an opportunity to gain key insights into the financial inner workings of these operations. And they have also created a set of measurement methodologies and used them to conduct a detailed 2-year end-to-end examination of the ransomware ecosystem. Their methods allowed them to track ransom payments from the acquisition of Bitcoins by victims to the cash out of Bitcoins by the ransomware operators. They were able to also conservatively estimate that the overall ecosystem revenue for the past 2 years has been over $16 million extorted from an average of 20,000 victims. An ensuing analysis of ransomware operators' cash out strategies indicated that BTCE, one of the better known ransomware families, was a key piece of support infrastructure that was used to exchange millions of US dollars worth of ill-gotten Bitcoins into fiat currency. The study also illuminates many open technical and ethical issues to measuring and intervening on the ransomware ecosystem.